Thanks. If we can get people in the room and sat down, we'll get started on our next session. Our next session is Insights from the World of Public Sector Leaders, 2013 State CIO Survey. Carol Henton, the Vice President at Tech America, will be introducing this session and moderating. Tech America is a leading proponent of technology solutions for government programs in the state and local government market. Please help me welcome Carol.
Thank you very much, Brenda. Well, the session today, this afternoon, is going to be all about our brand new 4th annual State CIO Survey. And you know, Doug runs a tight ship, and Doug has said that if the copies were available to you now, you'd all sit here and read them during the session. And instead, he really wants you all to pay attention to our 2 state CIOs, Claire Bailey from Arkansas and Stu Davis from Ohio. I'm really pleased to be able to tee this session up because this report, as Doug just said to me a minute ago, is really a seminal document that'll be used by him for the next year and used by all of you that are in the seats from the vendor community, because this is, well, a snapshot of a point in time. It truly does reflect the priorities today of our 50-plus state CIOs. So without any further ado, panel, oh, and I want to mention Graham Fenley from Grant Thornton. Graham is the principal writer on this document. He's a thoughtful, and by that I mean a very serious guy who takes his work seriously and has put together an excellent contribution in the writing that Doug and others have helped contribute to as well. So with that, welcome.
To the slaughter. All right, thank you, Carol. And my job is to keep the trains running on time, and we're 5 minutes late, so I'm ready to move on this. Appreciate your attendance after lunch today and listening to Ben. And now you get to listen to some of the other founding fathers and founding mothers and other people that are here. So, in the CIO world. So a little bit of today's discussion. This is, as Carol mentioned, the 4th iteration of our state CIO survey in partnership with Tech America and Grant Thornton. We're very pleased to present this today. It is available electronically as of this morning on both the NASCIO, Grant Thornton, and Tech America websites. And as you leave today, you'll be provided hard copies. We have those available at the registration desk as well. So you'll be able to get an artifact of our work as you leave the session today. Just a few minutes about the actual construction of the survey and a little bit of background, and we're gonna move into some of the major topics. We clearly don't have enough time this afternoon to cover all the topics in the survey, but we will have a little bit of time for folks to ask your questions, to get some questions at the end. I need my clicker. Are you guys advancing the slides back there? So I don't have my clicker up here, was not provided to me. So let's go to the next slide. So again, the survey background is one of the key pieces of the kind of NASCIO thought leadership around not only capturing comments from all of the state and territorial CIOs, but also zeroing in on some of the key topics. And we select longitudinal topics, which we'll get into year over year, but we also select new topics each year to investigate those new and emerging areas, or areas that we believe really have an impact on the growth and maturity, the disciplines and capabilities that we're seeing within the CIO office. This is the voice of the CIO. There's no other state officials involved in this. This is not to examine state IT in a global perspective. It's to examine what CIOs think and what their perspective and opinions are around these particular topics. But we're clearly evidence-based, and we want to be driven by the data. So if we go to the next slide, let me cover a little bit of the background here. So again, partnership between the 3 organizations, and you see the title. The title is very intentional, and it comes from the review of the various elements that we saw from both the comments and the data. Thank you very much. And that really is the fact that CIOs are really looking at this as an enterprise imperative for services, for technology, again, for the capabilities and disciplines that we'll speak about. And I think that's very important, that we really wanted to send a message that one of the significant pain points around a state CIO position all the time is that lack of enterprise vision. That's certainly something that all of them are seeking, is seeking that enterprise vision around their services and, again, their innovation platform. So let's talk a little bit about the survey, then we'll get into the topics. We had responses, I think, extraordinary responses. We have 55 members, and we had completed responses from 54. So again, I think that was extraordinary. When you look at the other results and certainly the response rate of other national surveys. It was not a small survey. It was 42 multiple choice questions, some open-ended questions. Certainly wasn't like ARS. It took a lot of time for the CIOs to complete this survey. We captured a significant number of comments. I think given the number of questions that I saw, I was really, I guess, really surprised at the number of comments we received, which really helped us inform the narrative of the survey, because they gave us some really good background that was not contained simply in the raw data responses. And we assured that all those responses would remain anonymous and we would not attribute those. So we got some very honest and open-ended. I think you will see that reflected in the responses, that you will see that they are in fact very, in some cases, brutally honest about where they are today and where they need to be. So I think that's very, very important. I don't know if John's in the room, but I want to do a shout out to John Ledford, CIO, Commonwealth of Massachusetts. I think I owe him a cold beverage. He was the first CIO to respond to the survey within the day. And I think he probably had things to do. So give it up to John. So I did want to recognize him for that. So 12 topics. You will see those 12 topics listed. You'll certainly see those presented in the report. We're going to focus on the 6 that are highlighted in red as you look at the slide up here. 6 topics are in red. And again, those again were purposely selected to provide a cross-section to a little bit of the business side as well as the technology side. And again, some of those questions around mobility, social media, cloud, and consolidation are longitudinal questions, so we can track the growth in those areas year over year. So we'll touch on mobility and cloud services because they continue to be very, very hot topics. So again, that's the stage for today in terms of our agenda, is to really go through that. I'm going to provide the play-by-play. You'll see the data, and then Stu and Claire and Graham, our distinguished panelists, the topic of this is insight. So they will provide, guys, insightful and compelling responses to the data as it's presented.
What?
Stu didn't know that until now. So the point here is that we wanted to give you a snapshot we thought were really important in some of the areas where we clearly see growth, but we clearly see some of the challenges and the barriers that CIOs have to overcome. So I think it portrays, I think, a really good picture of what's going on across the states, recognizing that this is homogenized information. So it may not represent a single state. It's kind of this macro view, but we think it's pretty topical. So here are some of the highlights from the results, and we'll also end with some of the conclusions. But again, these are some of the highlights, is that there's some continuing challenges around risk management, particularly as results to procurement and in those areas, and we're going to dig into that a little bit. We have several questions around sourcing. Governance is a continuous theme, particularly around how do you drive this, again, this enterprise vision, and what kind of governance models do you have. We see a lot of discussion even today on the NASCIO community about governance structures and governance models. We've seen a growth in maturity around social media, where 3 and 4 years ago it was kind of this new thing, but it wasn't structured. There wasn't a lot of discipline around states were doing. Enterprise policies weren't in effect around social media, and the actual integration of social media into the citizen interaction channels didn't exist. And again, we're seeing more of that based on the results of the survey. And then finally, we'll talk about cloud. We had several questions around cloud. We'll touch on a couple of those, particularly around not the technology platforms as much as the challenges around procurement of clouds and the terms and conditions issues. So those are very, very important. So let's start out with a significant topic, and one we actually lead the report with, and that is around IT project and portfolio management. We've certainly been documenting this in the growth of PMOs and project management offices, the adoption of project portfolio management, particularly at the enterprise level by CIOs, the introduction of portfolio dashboards to track IT projects. We've seen that in states, at the federal government, so we thought we would dig in and ask a series of laddered questions around, do you have that and how effective is it? So again, question that we asked about, how effective are your state practices? And again, you'll see about half the states think that they're only somewhat effective. So we have a very small number, and you think about that 4% that say they're very effective, that represents about 2 states. So it's a pretty small sample size. So again, don't be misled by the percentages. So you have a significant number of the states that think their project portfolio and management practices around large IT projects are really just somewhat effective. And the second question is, do you use that to support decisions around planned initiatives? And I think, again, you'll see the response rate at about 63% in terms of where they're using it for application support, and they say, yes, they do. So again, 2/3 of our state CIOs respond they're using it, and we'll kind of get to the baseline here from our 3 commentators and then look at the second part of this question around the effectiveness. So I'm going to start down here with Graham. Graham's going to cover kind of the macro view as the person that got to see all of the data as it was flowing in, and really was the prime author of some of the analysis that we worked on. His view, and then we'll get from Claire and Stu their individual perspectives from their states on project and portfolio management. So Graham, I'll go to you first on your perspectives on what we're seeing here with the growth of this discipline.
Okay, thanks, Doug. I think we're in a position now that almost every state has some kind of formal project oversight process in place. There are very few that don't. And increasingly, we're seeing there's statewide authority for that invested in the CIO. And while some states have been doing this in a formal manner for a long time, there are a number of states that have had processes in place since the 1990s. There seems to be quite a wave of activity in state legislatures over the past few years, and there's quite a lot of new organizations that are being set up, or with new authorities at the CIO level to be performing formal project oversight. One set of feedback we got from respondents was that they feel that a lot of the time oversight is quite significant and intense through the point of funding approval, but after that it can drop off and things become much more decentralized at the agency level. Something we didn't ask about, but unsolicited, we got lots of comments around, was the use of independent project oversight, or IV&V vendors. And generally, the CIO's respondents felt that that was a very worthwhile investment, but a number of them felt to be most useful that I in IV&V had to be taken very seriously, and it worked better when, if you were using some third-party provider for those services, they did not report or did not have their contract through the same organization that was sponsoring the project. And then on the portfolio management side, while we have about 2/3 of the states who have some kind of formal IT portfolio management process, that's up from 2010. It was only about 50% when we asked the same question in 2010. But generally, CIOs seem to think the level of effectiveness really hasn't changed much in the last 3 years.
So Claire, your projects, I know of the personal experience, 100% of them are on time, on budget, with no drama. So I'm not sure you can answer this question, but take a shot at it.
Thank you, Doug. And Stu and I decided, without asking you, which is scary,
Of course
we
you
would
would.
just answer yes and no to keep us on schedule.
Very
Yes.
good. That will keep us on time.
We were just messing with you, though. I'm a project management professional by trade, and we were speaking a little bit before we got up here about the reality of this. What I found is, in theory, the methodology is beautiful and it works because I helped write it. And helped create the office in my younger days. But when it came to the reality of actually seeing it work and finding the toolkit that could help you really track the actual hours where you're hitting on your projected budget, and then ensure that you are going to deliver a customer a service that he or she is satisfied with and serves a citizenry, that leaves a lot to be determined. So matching that theory to the reality of what we're going through is probably the most difficult aspect of this entire solution kit.
So Stu, how did you answer this question, if you can remember back that far in your younger days?
I can't remember. That was almost a month ago. I think I probably got the award for being the last in. on that, probably pretty close anyways. I remember a couple of phone calls. So it's Ohio is kind of an interesting place, to put it bluntly. So we don't manage some of the major big projects that might be coming out, and we use IV&V in a lot of those major projects. And historically, what they've done to the Enterprise Project Management Office is put them in a contractual review role, which means there's a problem going on or some kind of issue that we have to get engaged with when it gets to that level. But all the projects that we have going on with IT optimization run through the EPMO, and they do a pretty good job of getting that information to us, but they go to a granular level, at least at this point, where it might really be one project, but there's a bunch of tasks, and they look at each one of those tasks as a project, so it's very hard to roll it up as a dashboard. We're working through all of those things. I would say that on all of this, from Ohio's perspective, we're somewhat effective, but we have a long way to go, and certainly in the portfolio management space, we're very, very, very immature in that space. We're just really trying to get our arms around that whole issue now.
So good segue into the follow-up question then, which was the question about the effectiveness of your IT portfolio management practices. So you indicated you're relatively immature. We looked at the states that use portfolio management, I think, again, somewhat ineffective, and we've got lots of content from our comments on what they believed would be more effective, particularly around governance and authority. Again, more disciplined approaches to that, and that's essentially what you're looking about in Ohio.
Right.
Claire, in Arkansas, the same thing, or how would you answer that?
It's actually the same in Arkansas. And what's real interesting is our partnership, we're slightly structured differently. I'm an independent agency, so I don't report into the administrative function of government. So the chief fiscal officer and I are peers, and we share, he's on our state technology council, so we share vision together. When it comes to portfolio management, he doesn't buy in, and he has the checkbook. As much as I would love it, he won't write me a check. Dang it.
Yes, that's true. And Graham, I know, looking at even private sector, we see some.
Hard to believe.
I know.
Write them a
I'm
check.
still working.
All the charm you have, are you kidding me?
I know. I know these guys are going to be trouble. Graham, I think we're seeing even in the private sector similar responses that even their portfolio management disciplines seem to be only somewhat effective in keeping. At least, particularly on the IT decision and investment side, so that's always tough.
And that's true. I mean, there's no magic bullet, and the problems are sort of the same in either sector. It was interesting. I think we got in the comments when people were responding to this question, we got about 5 recommendations that came out pretty strongly about how to improve IT, either aspirations of where states would like to be or best practices that they'd implemented. So, the first was an enterprise view of the portfolio, not just agency by agency, but a statewide view of the portfolio, and also overseeing the entire project lifecycle, and where possible, do the approvals in an incremental fashion. Use stage gates or milestones rather than an all or nothing, like go or no go. Centralization of the role was seen as important, especially with tools. A lot of people talked about the tool sets not really being supportive, much more than I think we expected, but that was a big theme, that not having the right tools and not the right visibility into information. Strong executive level sponsorship was obviously a theme. And then the last one was stronger training and professional development for the state staff who are managing this process. Okay.
Again, strong suggestions that we have around that, and you'll see some of the same suggestions that we're actually going to document some of those for you here about our next topic, which is always one of the top 10 topics and the favorite discussion points for CIOs, and that's around IT procurement. So let's go to the bottom question first, which mirrors the question we asked last year. These are similar questions to our 2012 survey. How satisfied are you with the current system of IT procurement in your state? Again, kind of a broad question. Interestingly enough, last year we asked this question, just to give you a comparison, year over year, 23% of the CIOs were dissatisfied, 23% were somewhat dissatisfied. So you still had about the same number, around the 50% range, that were overall dissatisfied in some measure around the IT procurement processes. So it's fairly steady, and that is interesting because we've had almost 30% different respondents in terms of the 2013 survey. Given the change in CIOs, we had a large number of the respondents who were not around in 2012 to respond to this question. Interesting enough, the number around that are very satisfied stayed about the same, and those are the small number of states that I would suspect, although I haven't looked at the data, are probably where IT procurement is under the state CIO's purview. Now, I think Carlos answered this survey before he was given state IT procurement, so he may have answered differently late next year, but or he may answer that he's very dissatisfied. We'll have to see how that goes. But I think that's certainly the range. So with that, and then we'll I guess ask this question of our CIOs about how satisfied are they with their current system, and then we'll talk about some of the I guess proposed improvements or remedies around improving that. But I guess in terms of looking at that question, what would you predict was your response to that?
Oh, I would say somewhat satisfied. I mean, let's see, if a year from now, it'll be more important to get my response since we're going through IT reform and we're consolidating. There were two sides of the IT procurement. We're moving those all together as one. So we've had a fairly sizable effort to look at bringing that IT component together. It's an interesting piece because there's components of education on the state side, there are components of education with the procurement folks, and understanding the major initiatives that we have so that when things come up, they can, whoa, slow down. Maybe we have a solution in that space. I mean, this is a sizable issue, as we all know. That's why we're all dissatisfied with it.
So, Claire?
No one tweet, but I fall into the somewhat dissatisfied. And an example is we had a major network redesign and migrating to a new technology. 3 years, third bid, and I think about the impact on the vendor community of how many man-hours and dollars invested in every time you had to reply to one of those bids. And so I like to try to balance what we're doing across the community and make sure we're successful the first time, but think about that. Not only was that 3 years, but that was an impact on every customer, over 2,000 edge points on a state network who could not move forward because we're consolidated. So my favorite model that I've seen so far is the state of Texas and what Karen Robinson's been able to do, because that's something that's an opportunity for us. And I thank you, KK.
So tweet about that, folks.
Tweet that. Well, I'm from Arkansas and she's from Texas, so maybe not, Doug. There's a little football challenges going on. Not that we have a team, but it's a growing area that I think we could all work together to improve.
So let's go up to the top question, get some comments from Graham, and then we'll go back down. This is clearly an area when you turn about risk management, and we had some questions around this, focus around the T's and C's and challenges, and this is one that continually comes up. So to what extent do you believe that those T's and C's really hurt the procurement of IT goods and services? Are they really that effective in terms of sharing the risk? And again, we had a lot of comments about this as well in our open comment period. So I asked Graham to provide some perspective on, again, very similar responses. About 48% or so think it's ineffective, and they need to really look at a more innovative model. So I guess I'd get your comments on that, Graham. We'll ask Claire and Stu the same follow-up questions.
Okay, so the topic of contract terms and conditions is a perennial topic of excitement for the vendor community. And we wanted to, I guess, understand how much the CIO shared that level of excitement. I think the response, it's fair to say, was divided. There's about a 50-50 split between those CIOs that feel the allocation of risk through the contracting mechanism is appropriate, and those that don't necessarily feel it's the most effective way to do it. A lot of CIOs recognize that the risk allocation in the current contractual terms and conditions generally favored the state, but a lot of them didn't really see a problem with that either. I think they recognize the deterrent effect the terms and conditions could have, but also in a lot of states, those are not under the CIO's control. And so there's a certain sense, a little they can do about it. Where they looked at opportunities for improving procurements, a lot of the focus was more on the process than it was on terms and conditions, and I think we're going to talk about that on the next slide. A couple of exceptions were, there were some areas where there clearly was a recognition that they were important. Limitation of liability was probably the biggest one. And then also respondents identified cloud and software as a service as different animals, and that these were widely viewed as needing special attention and a different treatment.
Claire, your perspective on that, still somewhat dissatisfied, huh?
And a lot of that when we talk about the change agents, sometimes in some states you're talking about legislation, which is, I don't know about y'all, I love it when somebody opens up my legislation and tries to modify it. And you get to have a lot of fun. The other part of that is some of it, even in Arkansas, is constitutional based. So think about that. So I do see the changing tide where we are seeing a very pro-business approach legislatively, at least in Arkansas we are. So there may be some momentum we could bring on by all working together.
So what does the great state of Ohio say?
So the terms and conditions, to me, I mean, it's always amazing how much we negotiate around things that we really know we can't negotiate around, it seems like. Because I would think that if I was an attorney, not that I am, but I did spend the night in a Holiday Inn a couple of weeks ago. But, you know, it seems like we have core things that we need to make sure that are in every single contract we have, and the rest should be somewhat, you know, fluid. And I think it takes two to tango. I mean, I know that very well, that the partner vendor, you know, environment, sometimes they need to work with us. Sometimes the cycle, you know, I think having deadlines on, you know, look at, you got 10 days to respond to this. If you don't get back to us in 10 days, you're going to the end of the line, and it happens to be the end of a quarter, then, you know, you're going to get some response. But I think that that's one of the kind of things that you have to do, is we have to just kind of take a step back, and you have to work with your legal counsel on a lot of the terms and condition pieces. And they just need to understand that, you know, we have things we have to get done, and we can't wait 8 months for some of these things that take for God awful ever. But to even have, you know, here's how long it takes for us to do a procurement, and to be able to measure that and show improvement through that process, which is what hopefully we'll be doing here shortly, will make a big difference. But like I said, it takes two to tango.
Again, good segue into our next kind of set of topics and a question around procurement. So not only did we give the state COs a chance to vent their frustration around the procurement process and the effectiveness, we said, oh, right, until then what are the reforms that you have been working on? We gave them a series of responses, fairly detailed, and we also gave them the opportunity to respond, open-ended comments. So I think these are very illustrative in terms of what we saw around IT procurement. So in terms of the 3 reforms, again, you'll see very detailed narrative around that, but I wanted to get Graham's perspective, and then we'll move back down again on the row here and get some ideas about what these states may have been doing. The top one, by a pretty wide margin, was around providing training to staff involved in IT procurement. This is something we hear quite often, is perhaps why the movement to moving IT procurement under the state CIO's purview is that it's much easier for the state IT community and for those staff and expertise to understand procurement than it is for the procurement officials and for their staff to understand the complexities and speed and urgency around state IT. And so we've seen that. So that's one of the things, is a little bit more training and certainly looking at balancing the risk. So as you look through these, Graham, I guess some general comments. We've seen some work around, again, reforms specifically, and we've documented those in a lot of briefs around limiting the unlimited liability clauses and providing some more flexibility in pre-negotiation and relationships, but there's still a long way to go. But this at least starts the ball rolling with some of the documented evidence we have from the survey. So I guess I'll go back down to Graham for his kind of global commentary and ask our 2 CIO colleagues here what they may have done in their particular states.
Okay, so I think the 2 recommendations we got again and again and again from CIOs when they were talking about the IT procurement process, first was it takes too long, and the second was the structure of the procurement process is so risk averse that it stimulates innovation. You know, the structure setup, it almost cares more about preventing a protest than in getting a successful outcome. And in terms of resolving that, that's why the recommendation, I think, about training IT procurement people so they actually understand IT and especially for large projects, understand the nature of projects, and it's different to buying a commodity, that was almost a root cause, and that would be something that would have to be resolved before you could get at some of these other improvements. And then a second area and from the process was really trying to construct procurement steps that encourage dialogue as many times as possible in a structured manner between the vendor community and the state, and that could help in a whole range of different areas, and also to try and speed up the process so that the requirements aren't out of date already by the time you get to a contract award.
So Claire, these responses are aspirational. They're asking, what would be the best in terms of reform, in terms of looking at that list. What have you been able to chew off on any of those?
We actually dove into, we're in the midst of another procurement, also concerning the network, and will have a major impact on basically delivering fiber infrastructure to every school in our state. And we're a small rural state. Huge bid process, 78 different telecommunication vendors are excited about that. But we blended the team, and we had some informational webinars and ways to train not only the state procurement people, but also these new vendors who might be a very small rural telecommunications company, that to say things like, you have to agree to the state standard terms and conditions. Please don't dispute that. You will be thrown out. Because I know that this will shock you, there are people who may not ever do business with state governments. I know. And as part of that, it's training on both sides. So that the training aspect is huge. And then our procurement group loves the multi-state agreements, loves it. And that is if we have a multi-state agreement that we can buy off of, they're negotiating really well on those.
Okay. Stu, any things on here that
actually,
are more than aspirational for you?
We went through a process with a major initiative that we had where we brought the system integrators in ahead of time. We kind of just generally said this is what we're looking at and asked them to sort of provide sort of their experience in that space. And we also asked them to identify RFPs and contracts and terms and conditions that they found to be very, very solid and very good. And of course, you got to keep everybody sort of even on that. And to also identify where we had terms and conditions in RFP, deliverables that were bad. So tell us where we are. And we kind of took that and we wrapped it all together. And then we put the RFP together back out based upon those comments. And I think that process was really good. We had the procurement people in the room so that they got to learn through the process. It's not like trying to go to somebody in the state who's in charge of the business office and telling them, I need to fly to someplace, and they've never flown, right? So they don't care that you have to stop in 15 places across the state, even though it's the cheapest thing in the whole world. But, so you want to kind of bring those people in. I think that's a great idea, is to train them. They need to understand what the objective is of what you're trying to accomplish. I would say the same for the legal people. They need to also kind of get the understanding of this is what we're trying to do and why, and then quit telling me everything I'm doing is unconstitutional. That's the other one I have to get rid of. But I think that process that we went through is something that I would like to, bring in and really incorporate on those major projects. And major projects probably being over 10 million, somewhere in that neighborhood, where we're gleaning from the best across everything, that the states have done, and looking at how someone else has done a very good job. We want to maybe latch onto that and, where the pitfalls might be. So I think that this nails it, to be quite honest with you, with the things that we're trying to put in place.
Just as a follow-up, should let you know that the Executive Committee of NASCIO rechartered our 3 major standing committees on Saturday during their board meeting, and the Procurement Modernization Committee was rechartered with a new set of deliverables and action items, and certainly a number of these will be on their list, particularly around T's and C's for SaaS and cloud services. And so we expect that's, again, a joint corporate member, NASCIO, Tech America, and NASPO, our state procurement officials coalition. And so again, we expect to see some work in our next program year around some of these topics. We'll be using the results of this survey as kind of a foundation for examining some of these and recommending reforms and getting those good ideas out of the state. So we've covered kind of what I'll call the line of business activities around the CIO from the standpoint of project management, portfolio management, IT procurement, the business pieces, and now we're going to dig into some operational pieces. Again, the 2013 was a major year for all types of man-made and natural disasters, particularly thinking with the natural disaster portfolio that we had around Superstorm Sandy. We had flooding, we had wildfires out west, we had major flooding, continue to have some of these issues. And so this was a timely set of questions around, kind of a major operational area that we had not done any inquiries on in previous surveys. So we've got a couple of questions around this to kind of set the stage for the DR and the business continuity activity. And I'm going to kind of start with the basic question, which is around generally the organization and governance of disaster recovery and business continuity within the states around IT. And again, you'll see the general response is around 2/3. There's still kind of a federated strategy, although a small number, have an enterprise approach. I think we're seeing the growth in that with cloud services, the ability to provide a cloud service, a cloud environment for disaster recovery and business continuity. We're also seeing states that obviously have their backup data centers within the state and now employing more and more a private cloud approach with that environment. So I guess I'm going to go ahead and start with you, Stu. You have, I believe, a state-of-the-art data center up there in Columbus that you've been trying to sell on eBay for a while, so you might want to talk about
Like hell.
Yeah, exactly. So you've got 21% are still highly decentralized in terms of their general approach, but in terms of your business model, I suspect that Ohio is probably a federated, is a mix of agency. Yeah. But what's your direction in that area, and what do you see as some of the impediments? And then we'll follow up with a couple more questions on DR.
So I think, our mainframe DR has always been pretty solid. And when we do several tests, we put some things in play over probably the last 3 years that really get us back and get the agencies operational in a much quicker fashion, to the tune of probably a 3-day increase in getting them back up. To your point, the open systems, it's a crapshoot. I think, one of the two things that I always bring up about the state's posture and why IT optimization and some form of consolidation is important is to have a consistent posture with business continuity and disaster recovery. Because it might be a program, and that program has some DR, but the rest of the agency might not have it. And it's across the boards. And trying to get our arms around that, we basically went to one of the agency CIOs and said, guess what? Your job is to get the requirements from all the other CIOs, so that we can at least put something together that we can chase after a DR solution someplace in the state of Ohio. And a commercial data center, because I'm not building any more data centers, we did a lousy job managing the other one. I don't think I need another one. 80 miles away or 50 miles away, we can't even do the one in our backyard. But we've addressed that as well. And the other piece that I would say is that we're very, very strongly encouraging the business side to really be the drivers on the business continuity component. It's not the IT guys that need to go through and prioritize the business applications that need to come up first. And so that is also a challenge, trying to get the agencies to recognize that a business continuity really needs to be part and parcel with the business of the agency itself.
Claire, you're in Tornado Alley. I suspect, given the decentralized nature of state IT, you fell down on this federated model as well in terms of...
You're going to be surprised on my answer, because legislatively, we actually are the home of the continuity of operations and disaster recovery strategy.
Very good.
So we have a centralized system, and we work in partnership, legislative audit. We'll go and audit you, and if you're not in the plan or your plan is not up to date, you get in the paper. So it's kind of exciting. We also have the opportunity, and I think it's around the maturity model of how long some of the cabinet members have been in place. When we went in with our interoperable land mobile radio system, we got to know a lot of the public safety side of the house. And so as the CTO for Arkansas, we leveraged that. We're now the emergency support function for telecommunications in the time of disaster, and that bridges over to the private sector. So Kim Patterson, my Chief Information Security Officer, has people on speed dial to go put in, when those tornadoes come through, to drop in the cell towers on wheels, the cows, and get those ready to roll for us. So surprisingly enough, we're in that 13%, and they love the tool that we have. And that's available. We will share that.
So I guess that looking at the comments and the rest of the data we had, Graham, any insightful thoughts on this particular topic before we move on to some of the more operational aspects?
I think just a couple, I suppose, that even within sort of any kind of broad umbrella, usually the situation is broken down further in a couple of different dimensions. So there's a differentiation between mainframe and decentralized. I think as Stu was saying, it's often a very different game depending which type of infrastructure you're talking about. And also there's a prioritization of business processes where some of the mission critical processes may have centralized DR, continuity of operations, but the less critical ones are devolved to the agencies.
Okay. So next couple of questions, again, we'll get our CIO panelists up here to weigh in on these two. We asked for a range of roles and responsibilities in the event of a disaster. How does the CIO, how do they actually have either through policy, protocol, practice? Interestingly, we have 19% of our respondents said the role of the CIO is not well defined or it's unclear in this. Some are working, as you heard Claire, very actively with their emergency management and their lines of business. So I guess just quickly, when you look at this, anything strike you as unusual in terms of your particular role, Claire, in that CIO role?
I think the other hard part of that, because we have a lot of responsibility, is the assumption that we can fix anything. For example, we had a major snowstorm in Little Rock, which always catches us off surprise. It was several inches. Sometimes we freak out when it's just 1 inch, but it was around 8 to 12 inches. And so I'm boarding the plane on the 26th of December as you get the restricted call, and they say, hold one moment for Governor Beebe. And he says, I want my phones working. Phones are not working. Now, y'all, there's 12 inches of snow. The city is pretty much shut down, and then we have to make sure that we get those landlines back up. That can be something that the coordination with state officials and how we work together, now they look at you and say, you can do anything, and expect that.
Let me move to the next one. I'm going to give you all both a chance to answer this question. So I was actually somewhat surprised by the percent that said that they are continuously updating, so I think that's good. But this is always a question. You look at any of the other, certainly in the private sector, we've seen this question, and often the public sector falls down in terms of their ability to continuously monitor. In some cases, they're not updating their DR and BC plans on a regular basis. So I guess, Stu, your response to this from the state of Ohio in terms of your...
Yeah. So on the mainframe, we do it twice a year, and so we're testing twice a year on that and making sure that the plan is updated and reviewed after each one. On the business continuity side, I believe they have a responsibility to, excuse me, sorry.
Thank you, Stu. I'll lean in.
Yeah, I know. I was trying to keep away from the mic. I didn't do a very good job, and I'm here all week. So on the business continuity, they are required to put a plan in. It hasn't been really enforced until probably the last 6 months, where we're telling them they have to get those plans in, but they're doing those annually now. So we're getting a lot more synergy in that space.
So we're annual, and you get audited. So
Okay.
we've got checks in, balances, and verification.
Yeah, very good. So let's jump to, we've covered some of those other topics. We've got 3 more quickly to kind of go through. One which we really wanted to collect a lot of information about, because we haven't done this, I believe, since 2010, which is around the BA space, predictive analytics. We've heard a lot about the term big data. This is really not about big data. We certainly found out last year, and I think continues to be fairly obvious in terms of big data is not so big yet for the states. It's a growing area, but what we've certainly known around data mining and the use of the BA tools, they've been around for many, many years. So we asked some questions around within the state government, and again, we probably had about 20 responses to this, but we rank ordered that and just presenting the kind of the top 10 agencies where the CIOs believe that the BI and BA tools are being used effectively and they have positive outcomes. Ohio was recognized, the state of Ohio, last year by NASCIO they were the award recipient in our knowledge management space for their enterprise BI environment. They have a shared services business intelligence center I think very forward-leading. So I'm going to ask kind of Stu to weigh in on these responses, and does that line up with your thoughts in Ohio? But again, you've got an enterprise product suite as well, so it's kind of different.
Yeah, you know, so it's, I mean, it's been kind of pleasant in that regard that and a lot of it comes back to the database structure and all those kind of things. And we work through those issues probably, I want to say 4 to 5 years ago as we stepped through that process. And now it is like the de facto tool. I mean, we get reports all the time. We can ask the right questions and we can get the same answer, you know, which is always kind of comforting.
Wow.
Yeah, right. So, I mean, you can change the parameters a little bit and get a little different. But I think also this is one of those areas where, as Sonny said earlier in the week, you know, we have to get better with the data and the decisions that we make, and I think that the BI component of that is a critical piece in being able to do that. But there's a lot of nuances to the data and understanding the data. We're doing that right now with the integrated eligibility effort that we have and the 7 different data warehouses that are in the 7 different agencies that have something to do with health and human services, and trying to pull that data, once we understand the data, into a better environment for us to do the BI too. But the good part of that, at least my comfort level in that space, is I've got to practice. These guys know what they're about, they know what they're doing, and we're working as an enterprise to pull those things together. So I feel pretty confident in this space here.
Claire, does this lineup resonate with you? And have you looked at that shared services model in terms of the CIO's office?
We are, and we're trying to ensure we've got the customer base and the executive buy-in to support it. So we've got a slightly diverse environment where we've got, I hate to name products, but I will. So we've got both the business objects through SAP, and we've got a strong Cognos presence. And so now I've got competing warehouses, and a lot of people coming in to say, and I've got this beautiful new fraud framework and different things. So we see the need and the desire, but we still, because we are decentralized and non-consolidated, have to win that business based on personality. Yeah, okay, come on, y'all. I know it's after lunch. I did almost fall out of my chair, Doug. You missed it when this slide came up. I don't know what, it scared me. But we're trying to integrate those different platforms, but also bring those business units together to let it go. And let's see, let's let those walls down and see what we can do and find working with one another.
And if I could just interject,
Yeah, sure.
you know, the real reason why the BI component, you know, several years ago was successful is because we bypassed the IT people. And we went straight to the business units, and we talked to the business units about what they needed and what they wanted. And then we went back to the IT people and said, this is what these guys are asking for. And that was a tremendous benefit to us.
So in education, we have a very consolidated reporting tool that's used, and the individual school districts run over 3,000 reports in a daily environment, sharing data and comparing across districts, analyzing their costs and making sure they can keep the doors open. So we see pockets of it, but we've got a lot further to go. This one excites me, Doug.
Yeah, so I think to that point, I'm going to have Graham jump in for our next question here, which we asked, really, what's the current utilization and deployment, and what I think the kind of the as-is to-be responses from our CIOs around the BI/BA space, which really mirror what we heard a few years ago.
Right. I think there's a couple of things here. I don't think there was much of a surprise in terms of, you know, the program areas where it's being used a lot, you know, on the prior slide, the usual suspects, health and human services, revenue, and so on. What I actually found more interesting was those areas where it's hardly being used at all. We didn't have room for it on the slide, but the written report has a series of others. And ironically, they're not areas that are lacking in data. You know, things like natural resources and agriculture and tourism, hardly any. There's a lot of white space out there where analytics really isn't being used today, but it could be. I think part of the challenge is that it's actually a little bit still reflective of what we talked about with big data last year, that a lot of, I think, the state community are feeling that the solutions are sort of ahead of the business in a way, and it's still a little bit of a, you know, there's a technology looking for a problem. and people don't necessarily know what to do with it. So there's a lot of great technology tools out there, but people are struggling in certain program areas, certainly, in figuring out what the applications are. To me, it suggests, if you're a vendor talking to the states, the way to do it is to come in talking about a particular business issue and how analytics can help with that business issue. Don't focus on the technology.
Can I add something? There's a lot of new emerging tools out there too that are cloud-based, different solutions, and that can come in. And when we showcase those, or when I showcase those to the Geek Squad, they're like, "Well, we can do that." And my answer is, why not? Why haven't we? So we've also got to work together on the education component. Let's get it done.
And actually, I'll just throw another 2 bits in there. I personally don't believe that we're going to be able to keep, it's hard enough to keep security people.
Right.
I can't imagine when we start to really talk about, big data and the analytics side of that piece, that we're going to be able to house a team that's going to be able to do that. The good part about the BI thing and the bad part about the BI thing is once you get the structure set up, it's great. The bad part about that is it assumes that every agency is coding their data correctly, which is the next big thing. So it's the panacea of all common ailments, not. I mean, there's still a lot of culture things that have to be fixed through the process.
Yes, as one of our former CIOs said, Doug, we really don't need a data quality initiative because if it wasn't for bad data, I wouldn't have any at all. So we don't want to go down that path. So our final 2 topics we're going to cover quickly here. So get your questions ready. We're going to try to provide a few minutes at the end for probing questions to our panelists. Mobility and cloud. So again, these are longitudinal questions. We asked the same question last year around mobility. And you see the responses stacked 2012, 2013. Very, very similar in terms of particularly, and again, this is disconcerting, but we know there's the challenges out there because of the speed of what's going on in the mobile services, mobile device area is the continuing fragmentation and lack of a coordinated government-wide framework around mobility. The agencies, many of them are out in front. They want to promote mobile services. They want to deploy mobile devices. You've got agencies that want to do their own BYOD. So again, in a very broad sense, generally how the state's managing mobility. You can see how the data stacks, very similar data year over year. And again, recognizing that there's a significant number of new respondents, new CIOs, and so they're seeing the same thing. So I guess I'll go with Graham, and then we'll move down here quickly and get some responses to how our states believe they're handling the mobile framework here.
Yeah, well, I think you said it. It's pretty much status quo. Except I thought it was interesting that we had 3 states last year that said all of their mobility projects were well coordinated government-wide, and this year we had none. I'm not quite sure what that means. But.
Yeah. So Claire, you got a handle on this, right?
Oh, we like to think so. We fall into that mostly coordinated. Again, we do have wonderful integration with our portal management team, and because we do have a strong mobile-first platform, it's worked well for us. We kind of jumped into the arena very early. We've learned a lot, but that also places a high demand from the consumer side for citizen services online, everything mobile. Never go into an office or a brick-and-mortar office to pay a state government person money and wait in line. So we're excited about mobility, and we have the stats to prove it.
Yeah, and I guess we could take this question a couple of different ways. I think the device management component, I think we're doing a pretty good job. We have an enterprise solution in place for driving adoption. Don't lose sight of the need to bring in the financial folks and the business offices in the agency, because they will scream bloody murder and act like they weren't involved in it, even though they were, but I didn't say that out loud. And then I think, I think probably the next question's more about bring your own device, isn't it? And but that is always a challenge. We're trying to stop 26 different mobile application platforms from being built so that we can maybe just have 2 or 3. That's a challenge. We have applications that are already out there in that mobility space, and they tie back into some kind of integration on the back end, or they're just really, mobilizing, if you want to call it that, or, putting it in front of a web page and acting like it's a mobile app. But it's across the boards. I mean, I think we're mostly there. The agencies are starting to understand that, you can still have one, but, we would like to have those coordinated in some fashion so that we can reuse and relearn, or reuse, just leave it that. We're always relearning.
Relearning, right? So quickly, we'll cover, and I'll just provide you with this data. I'll move into a couple of the more probing questions on cloud. So again, back to the longitudinal data, we asked this similar question actually for several years, just so we kind of know what's the state status in broad bands, not very detailed. But again, I think what you'll see here, if you looked at the 2012 data, is the state has some application in the cloud. We've got about a 10% increase year over year. So I think we're seeing that again grow where they have some applications. The rest, are fairly stable in terms of growth of percentages moving up into that category. We haven't seen a significant increase in the first answer that the states are highly invested, but we've certainly seen again the growth moving up, and still one state who has considered cloud but rejected it. So that's kind of the baseline at where the states are. So let's dig into our last two questions here, and then again we'll take questions from our audience, is around the cloud services, and again around this question about state laws and policies around issues of privacy and access to information. So we asked that question about state laws and some of the confounding issues around that. And again, you can see the responses here. So I guess I'll ask for some quick responses from our panelists here on this question around the restrictions and state laws on the cloud.
I'll talk really quickly.
Okay.
Is that better? I'll talk
Start
really
with
fast.
you. Yep.
Let's see. So where to begin on this one? I think when it takes less time to negotiate the contract than it does to build the application, I think we'll be over the hump. I think we put some terms and conditions, sort of a framework out there. We thought they were going to work for us. We've had some some vendors that bought into it, others that it was a horrible mess. And so I've asked the board to sort of consider that and look at those terms and conditions. Tell us what we screwed up and what we didn't, and let's get it right so we can do this quicker, because that application space and the quickness that we can get things set up in state government through a cloud service for an application is tremendous benefit to us.
Claire,
I'm just
comments?
going to nod my head and say yes to what Stu said.
Okay, that's always a wise
We
thing
practice that. I know.
Can you talk to
Well,
my
I'm watching the
wife?
clock. I'm a project manager.
Yeah, exactly.
On schedule.
Graham, we really focused on multiple aspects of cloud besides simply the platforms and the technology, but again, this discussion around T's and C's and legal issues. Any thoughts on this before we kind of plow into our last question on
Just that, although for the CIOs that felt the current framework wasn't really consistent with pursuing the cloud, they were actively working on it. But a lot of them felt, in some cases it's almost impossible to predict, and you never really know until you get into it, and then you start to see the problems. And so it's theoretically looking at a set of terms and conditions and telling whether there's going to be a problem is hard. You have to try it and then find out there are and then fix it.
Yeah. So back to that point and kind of ending with the question around tying it back to a previous discussion we had on the topic around procurement in general. We asked specifically around cloud and how has your state procured third-party cloud services? Again, you see the responses and again compared to 2012, extremely consistent. Other than the fact that we've seen a significant jump, as Claire has mentioned, around multi-jurisdictional. We've seen that with the WSCA cloud vehicles and those contracts. Again, a doubling of that. So I think that's really a good positive sign. It helps to streamline the acquisition process and gets around some of the unfortunate pain and suffering that state COs are going through on the cloud side. So again, that's how they've procured it. And then finally, again, another kind of just fact-based question, because we really wanted to inform NASCIO over the next year about where the states were in terms of contract templates for common cloud services. And again, I'll ask our two CIOs what do they have in place, because again, these are gaps that we need to try to close. So Stu.
And that's what I was talking about. We did go do research on terms and conditions and looked at cloud solutions, and then kind of came up with a straw man, if you will, ran it through our legal. And it worked in some cases and it didn't work in others. I think some of it has to do with the cloud providers maybe not having as much experience working with state government. But there's certain things that we have to have, and our current state term contracts don't provide adequate enough protection, so we pretty much tried to shut those down and move them into a different contracting mechanism to support the cloud and protect the state as is necessary.
So we're in the process of developing our templates and our standard negotiation toolkits. We've got a group of people working within the state, but I concentrated solely on making sure my attorney understood, my general counsel understood cloud, so that it didn't become more of a legal, oh yes you can, no you can't discussion, but it really focused on how can we do this effectively for our state, for multi-states, because this is here, we need it, and we need to maximize the tax dollars that we do get invested in technology in Arkansas. So he's slowly developing that template. I know that it would shock everyone that an attorney is slowly developing that template, but I'm going to volunteer him for the NASCIO group.
Do they still get paid by the word?
Yeah, and the argumentative word.
Okay, very good. Okay, questions. Questions, I want to give us a few minutes. We started a few minutes late, so I'm going to take the prerogative as a facilitator to go ahead and open it up for some questions. We have microphones, and if there are not any questions, then we can thank our panel and be dismissed. So any questions from our audience for our panelists around the survey? And again, you will get copies of this, and you will see more detailed responses in the data, as well as 6 other topics that are always on the top of your mind around this. So no questions out there?
Very thorough.
Okay.
Thank you.
That's it? Very good. So join me in thanking our panel.
Nice job. You might as well just stay there for 2 seconds. Okay. First of all, thanks for everybody hanging in here. I've got about 3 announcements I need to make, and then I'm going to let you go. First of all, I want to remind everyone that the discovery sessions happen after our next break. They're in ballrooms B, C, and D behind me. Please look at your mobile device or in your little booklets, and you can decide which discovery session you want to go. State members, we are going to have a business meeting at 4:30 this afternoon in Grand Ballroom H. We need you there to vote on a couple of key items, so one being our leadership for the next year. So please come, and we will take the ever-favorite all-CIO picture, which is something we all live for. Second thing is, again, don't forget to sign up for our historic walk and our donation to the City of Philadelphia. Tonight, look for your evaluations. They're going to come in your email. Those are the things that we use for the Programs Committee to make sure that next year at mid-year we'll have a great program, and next year have another great program. And then last but not least, I look forward to seeing everyone tonight at our NASCIO State Recognition Awards dinner. It starts at 6 o'clock in the evening in this room. Thank you. Now is a 30-minute break for the coffee shop.